In front of you are colors that have been killing people for centuries. Some guaranteed you the scaffold, others meant a slow poisoning. But just look at them. They seem completely harmless, don't they? Today we'll uncover secrets that were hidden for centuries. Purple. Why people in Rome were executed on the spot for this shade, and what the stinking secret of emperors has to do with it. Red. How the most desirable cosmetic of antiquity quietly damaged the brain and knocked out teeth. White. What terrible price did aristocrats pay for perfect skin? Green. Why luxurious ballroom dresses became the most elegant weapon of murder in England's history. Radioactive. How a color that glowed in the dark permanently changed the DNA of its victims. You have no idea how expensive an ordinary color could be. Let's find out how beauty became a deadly danger. Let's start with purple, or so-called Tyrian purple, which in ancient Rome was more valuable than gold. If today you can buy a purple t-shirt for a few dollars, 2,000 years ago, that choice could literally get you executed. Why? It's simple. Purple was an official monopoly of power. Julius Caesar and his successors issued strict laws. Wear a cloak of this shade without being part of the imperial family? That was treason. Punishment? Death. But why were they so obsessed with it? It wasn't just fashion. It was about how insanely hard it was to obtain it. The entire secret was the mucus of sea snails from the murex species. To produce just 1.5 grams of pure pigment, around 12,000 mollusks had to be collected and killed. To dye a single imperial toga, over 50,000 of these creatures were destroyed. Now let's talk numbers. In 301 AD, a pound of this dye cost 150,000 denarii. For comparison, an ordinary Roman soldier earned about 1,000 denarii per year. So to buy just half a kilogram of this pigment, a legionary would have to serve for 150 years without spending a single coin. But there was one more thing that movies rarely mention. Purple clothing smelled absolutely terrible. Since the dye was made from the rotting innards of mollusks, the fabric would retain the stench of rotten fish for years. In Rome, this very specific smell eventually became a strange symbol of wealth and power. If purple killed you through law, then red did it in a far more subtle way, through your own blood. The most desired pigment of antiquity was cinnabar. The Romans loved it for its incredible brightness, completely unaware that this divine powder was actually a pure neurotoxin. Let's start with where it came from. Cinnabar is mercury sulfide. The Roman state assigned its extraction exclusively to condemned slaves. In the mines of Almaden, a red dust filled the air, and people inhaled it with absolutely no protection. Life expectancy in a mercury mine rarely exceeded 6 months. People literally broke down. They developed what was called mercury tremor, an uncontrollable shaking of the body. Memory started to disappear, and teeth would simply fall out of decaying gums. But the real horror began when this powder entered the homes of the wealthy. Roman beauties were obsessed with cinnabar. They mixed it with oils and used it as lipstick and blush. They were literally rubbing mercury into their faces every single day. And this is where the details begin, the ones that don't make it into romantic books. Women paid a very high price for this color: teeth. In 20-year-old women, considered the most beautiful in Rome, the gums would turn black and the teeth would start to loosen. To hide this, they used early prosthetics held together with thin gold wire. Brain. Since mercury accumulates in the brain, a fashionable Roman woman would gradually become increasingly unstable. Insomnia, hallucinations, and sudden emotional outbursts were common among aristocratic women. Mercury slowly damaged the skin. Dark spots and sores would appear on the cheeks. The irony is that they often tried to cover these marks with even more of the same toxic makeup. Rich Roman women could see that something was wrong, but they often blamed it on bad luck or the anger of the gods. And still, they kept applying mercury-based cosmetics to their lips, becoming, in a way, living reflections of beauty and danger at the same time. For almost 2,000 years, white was the ultimate symbol of high status. The whiter your skin, the more it showed that you didn't work under the sun. But to achieve that perfect porcelain pallor, aristocrats used one of the worst possible poisons: lead white. It was a thick paste made of lead, vinegar, and even manure. Women, and sometimes men, applied it in heavy layers to hide every imperfection, from freckles to smallpox scars. The problem was simple. Lead is a heavy metal that doesn't just damage the skin, it slowly accumulates in the body and destroys the nervous system. The effects were devastating, and they appeared gradually. As lead entered the bloodstream, gums turned black, teeth began to fall out, and a strong odor of decay came from the mouth. With long-term use, the skin became gray, dry, and covered in sores. But instead of stopping, people applied even more makeup to hide the damage. Lead destroyed the nervous system. Headaches and insomnia appeared first, followed by hand tremors, and eventually paralysis and mental breakdown. One of the most well-known tragedies is linked to Maria Gunning, one of the most admired women in Britain at the time. She was so obsessed with her appearance that she continued using lead-based makeup even as her face began to literally break down. She died at 27 from cosmetic poisoning. At the time of her death, she reportedly looked like an 80-year-old woman. It was an era where beauty was slowly burning people from the inside. People became prisoners of their own makeup, unable to stop because without the white mask, they feared facing the very damage it had already caused. In the 19th century, the world went crazy for a new shade, Scheele's green. It was so bright and vivid that people used it everywhere, from dresses to children's toys. But there was one problem. The main ingredient of this color was arsenic. Imagine a typical Victorian dress. To achieve that rich green look, it could contain around 900 grams of arsenic. And to kill an adult human, you only need about 0.15 grams. So one woman at a ballroom could literally be carrying enough poison to potentially kill thousands of people. But it wasn't just fashion that suffered. The real danger was at home. Green wallpaper became an absolute trend. The issue was that when rooms became humid, and in London they always were, a fungus would grow on the wallpaper. It reacted with the arsenic in the paint and released a colorless gas, arsine. People were literally sleeping in toxic environments. They would wake up with severe headaches, nausea, hair loss, and doctors couldn't explain what was happening. Children suffered the most, since their rooms were often decorated with the brightest wallpapers. Even Napoleon Bonaparte was likely affected by this color. When his remains were examined, arsenic levels in his hair were found to be dozens of times above normal. His room on St. Helena was reportedly decorated with those same fashionable green wallpapers. But the real turning point came in 1861. A 19-year-old woman named Matilda Schurer, who made artificial green flowers for hats, died in terrible suffering. Before her death, her nails and the whites of her eyes turned bright green, and she was even vomiting green liquid. This shocking case finally opened people's eyes. Their favorite color had been, quite literally, death in disguise. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was struck by radium fever. Radium glowed in the dark on its own. No batteries, no wires. It felt like magic. People called it liquid sunlight and added it everywhere. Cosmetics, chocolate, even children's toys. But the most dangerous version of this color was reserved for the people who made it. In the 1920s, thousands of young women worked in factories painting watch dials with luminous paint. They were called the Radium Girls. Since the numbers were extremely small, they had to keep the brush tip perfectly sharp at all times. Management assured them that radium was harmless, even beneficial. Playfully, the girls would paint their lips and teeth with it to surprise boys on dates in the dark. But the truth was that each worker would often lick the brush tip up to 200 times per shift. Their bodies treated radium like calcium and literally built the radiation into their skeletons. The consequences are almost hard to imagine. The facial bones became so fragile they would crumble from the slightest touch. In many cases, the jaw would literally fall apart while speaking. With a half-life of 1,600 years, radium kept emitting energy inside their bodies, 24/7. X-rays showed their bones full of holes, as if they had been eaten away over time. Radium green became the final chapter in the story of killer colors. And that's it. I've only touched a small part of the history behind these colors. So tell me, is your favorite shade somewhere on this list? That's all for today. Subscribe and leave a like if you found this interesting. See you!